Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're listening to this right now, it's probably because you're looking for answers.
Right, you're looking around at the world.
Exactly. At the schools your kids go to, or the HR department in your corporation.
Government policies being rolled out.
Yeah, all of it. And you're feeling that gnawing sense that something is just fundamentally broken. And I don't mean broken like a car that needs a tune-up.
No, you mean broken, like the laws of physics have been completely inverted.
Up is down. Weakness is strength. Logic is hate. You see rules that don't make sense, punishments that don't fit the crimes.
It's that constant humming anxiety in the air that seems to demand your absolute silence.
Yeah, and you feel like you're going crazy. Well, today we're going to look at a blueprint that attempts to explain exactly why you aren't crazy and why the world has gone off the rails.
It's really good to be here for this one. And frankly, the source material we have today is unlike anything we've covered before.
It really is.
Yeah.
Usually we look at, standard business books or historical biographies.
But today, we are looking at a text that is incredibly dense. It's incendiary, and it is absolutely uncompromising.
We are doing a comprehensive review of a new ebook that is really shaking the foundations of the discourse online right now.
It's called Performativity Psychosis, Solipsism, Standpoint, Epistemology, and Karen's Female Supremacist Satanic Marxism.
Yeah, quite the title. It's written by Conrad Reicher. And before we go one second further, I have a job for you listening right now. You need to like and subscribe to this deep dive immediately.
You know how this works.
You do. The algorithm hates this kind of content. It tries to bury it. It wants you watching cat videos, not learning about how these cultural shifts are happening. So you need to help us beat the machine.
And more importantly, you really need to get this book. What we are discussing today is essentially written as a survival manual for the modern man.
Which is exactly who this is targeted at. The men's rights activist audience, the red-pilled manosphere.
Right. And Reicher has synthesized psychology, history, and political theory into this massive, coherent explanation for what he sees as the current madness.
So seriously, pause this audio if you have to right now. Go to Amazon Kindle or go to Google Play Books and buy Performativity Psychosis, Solipsism, Standpoint, Epistemology, and Karen's Female Supremacist Satanic Marxism.
Do it right now so you can follow along.
And while you're at it, make sure to follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack. That's Conrad Reicher, all one word, on Substack.
That's where he posts a lot of his raw updates.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. And I want to be completely clear right off the bat. Our goal today is to impartially report on the contents of this book.
Right. We are looking at this from an objective standpoint.
Exactly. This book contains some highly politically charged content. We are not endorsing these viewpoints or taking any sides left or right.
We are simply trying to convey the ideas that Reicher presents in the original source material.
Right, we're outlining his arguments so you, the listener, can understand the history of our institutions before they were, as Reicher claims, captured by feminists and Marxists.
So let's look at the premise of the book. It's terrifyingly simple, but Reicher is saying that the West isn't dying from economics or war.
Or climate change.
Yeah.
He argues it is dying from ideological possession.
Yes. But we need to be very specific about what kind of position he means.
Right.
His core thesis is that we have shifted from a reality-based civilization,
one built on what the Greeks called the logos.
exactly, to a civilization governed by what he terms performativity psychosis.
Performativity psychosis. That is a hell of a term. Break that down for us. What does the book say that actually means?
Well, he argues that we've allowed female emotion to replace objective evidence as the governing force of our civilization,
So it's a shift from the logos, meaning logic, reason, structure, facts.
to a chaotic feral pathos where tears count as data, where how you feel about a fact is more important than the fact itself.
So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack this history so we can understand the logic needed to critically analyze these institutional shifts. Let's start with section 1.
The diagnosis, performativity psychosis, and the death of evidence.
Let's look at the words themselves. Performativity implies a show, write, and act.
And psychosis is a clinical detachment from reality.
So Reicher defines performativity psychosis as the condition where emotional expression is treated as factual revelation.
Which is a huge shift. He gives the example of a sane society, let's say a court of law in 1950.
Right.
If you make a claim, you provide evidence. If I say, you hit me, I need to show a bruise or a witness or a video.
You need the receipts. You can't just say it happened.
You need the receipts. Reicher describes that as the masculine framework of reality, verifiability.
But he argues that in our current society, which he claims has been captured by a specific type of female psyche, The display of emotion is the evidence.
Yes. If a woman feels unsafe, the environment is automatically declared unsafe, regardless of what the actual crime statistics say.
Or if a person feels oppressed, they are oppressed regardless of the law.
Riker uses this phrase that really stood out. He says tears become evidence.
Tears become evidence. But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here, just based on how people normally think. Isn't that just empathy? If someone is crying, shouldn't we listen?
Well, Riker addresses that. He says that's the trap. That is exactly how the hack works, in his view.
Okay, how so?
He argues that in a personal relationship, yes, tears are a signal of distress. You comfort the person.
Naturally.
But when you scale that up to a macro level, to a political system or a corporate HR department, it becomes a weapon.
Because you can't build policy on crying.
Right. Riker argues that if the emotional reaction is the final word, then the person with the least emotional control becomes the most powerful person in the room.
That's actually a wild concept to wrap my head around. It means the most unstable person holds veto power over reality.
Precisely. He calls this the emotional veto.
The emotional veto.
And he uses a very potent case study to illustrate this, which is the current gender debate, specifically regarding adolescence.
Yeah, he cites data from JAMA Pediatrics in the book.
He does, showing a 4,000% increase in adolescent girls seeking transition therapy since 2013.
4,000%. I mean, just statistically, that's not an anomaly. That's a vertical line on a graph.
Medically speaking, Riker points out that kind of spike is impossible without an external vector. You don't just get a 4,000% increase in left-handedness or diabetes in a single decade.
Right. So what does he attribute it to?
He argues this is a social contagion. It's driven by pure validation and algorithms. You know, TikTok trends where declaring yourself non-binary earns you immediate social capital.
And so it's a performance. It's the performativity part of his theory.
Exactly. And he tells this story about a school in Oregon to illustrate this point.
Oh, the grizzly bear story.
Yes.
I had to read that part of the book twice to make sure it wasn't satire. Tell the listeners about the Oregon school.
Well, Riker presents this as the perfect example of performativity psychosis in action. According to the book, there was a 13-year-old girl who stood up in a school assembly. And she didn't just claim to be trans. She claimed to be a, quote, non-binary, two-spirit, lesbian grizzly bear.
A grizzly bear. An actual animal.
A grizzly bear. Now, Riker asks the reader to consider what happens in a rational world. In a world governed by logos.
Right. An adult steps in, a teacher or a principal.
They step in and say, okay, sweetheart, you're obviously going through something. Let's get you to a psychologist. You are a human child, not a bear.
Because that's what actual care looks like.
Well,
telling the truth and getting help.
exactly. But Riker points out that according to his research, that's not what happened. The principal clapped, the teachers smiled, they gave her a microphone, and the students cheered.
Wow.
Riker argues that this is the absurdity of adults affirming delusions simply to avoid being labeled bigots.
So when you affirm a child claiming to be a grizzly bear because you are afraid of the emotional fallout of saying no,
You are operating in a state of psychosis. You have detached from physical reality to service the emotional performance of a child.
it's madness. And Riker's point is that if you pointed this out, if you stood up in that assembly and said, look, she's not a bear, you would be the one getting dragged out by security.
You would be the villain.
Yeah.
Because you broke the psychosis. You popped the bubble.
And this links directly to the next concept it covers, which he says provides the academic cover for this madness.
Right. Standpoint epistemology.
I've heard this term thrown around in university settings,
Yeah.
but Riker really tears into it.
He does. He sees standpoint epistemology as the fuel for the fire. It's an academic theory that originated in the 70s and 80s, primarily in feminist sociology.
Okay, and what does it actually argue?
It argues that lived experience usurps logic. The theory basically says that knowledge is socially situated.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning, if you are from a dominant group, say, a white man, your view of reality is partial and distorted by your power.
Okay.
But if you are from an oppressed group, specifically women or marginalized identities, your standpoint grants you special access to the truth that objective data cannot touch.
So Riker is saying that under this theory, simply by claiming to be a victim, you become a high priest of truth.
Yes. He calls this solipsism with tenure.
Solipsism with tenure. That is a heavy line.
But that's a brilliant way to frame it. Solipsism is the philosophical idea that only one's own mind is sure to exist.
Right.
So Riker is saying these academics are essentially claiming my feelings are the only thing that's real, and because I have a PhD and I'm oppressed, you have to agree with me.
It creates that emotional veto again. Logic, data, math.
Yeah.
All of these things are dismissed as patriarchal or colonial if they hurt someone's feelings.
He brings up the example of a Google engineer to show how this works in the corporate world.
Yeah, this story was all over the tech blogs a while back.
Right. The engineer was fired for toxic behavior. But when Riker digs into the case, what was his actual crime, he expressed a preference for binary logic and structured code in a meeting about AI ethics.
Wait, binary logic, like zeros and ones.
Yeah.
The literal foundational language that computers are made of.
Yes. But in the context of the meeting, that preference for binary thinking, true, false, on, off, was deemed colonial and exclusionary because it didn't allow for the fluidity of other perspectives.
So according to this framework, computer code is racist now.
Under the strict application of standpoint epistemology, as Riker describes it, yes. Because precise definitions are seen as a threat to emotional comfort.
This is where the rubber really meets the road in the book. We aren't just talking about abstract philosophy classes anymore.
No, we are talking about the engineering that runs our modern world being dismantled because precise definitions are seen as violence.
It really paints a picture of a world where reality is being gaslit by a massive collective emotional outburst.
That's his argument entirely.
But he goes deeper than just the sociology.
Right.
He actually gets into biology. This is section 2, the biological roots. He talks about the maternal archetype.
Now, it's important to note Riker isn't saying mothers are bad.
Right, he's saying something very specific about this state.
Correct. This is where the book gets incredibly controversial, but also very incisive. He argues that the government and our institutions have morphed into a feral maternal archetype.
How does he explain that transition?
He claims we have a generation of women who have largely repressed biological motherhood due to careerism, low birth rates, or ideological choices, and they have projected that natural nurturing instinct onto the state apparatus itself.
So instead of mothering children, they're attempting to mother society.
Yes, but he argues it's not a healthy mothering. It's not the mother who pushes you out of the nest so you can learn to fly.
It's what Jung would call the terrible mother.
Exactly, the overprotective, devouring mother.
Yeah.
The one who says, don't go outside, it's dangerous. Stay here with me forever where I can keep you safe.
And Riker argues this psyche splits the world into two distinct categories, right?
Infants who need absolute protection and safe spaces, and predators who need controlling.
And let me guess who the predators are in this model.
In this worldview, he argues almost all men, specifically competent, independent men, are categorized as predators. They are seen as inherent threats to the infants.
He uses another example from that same Oregon school district.
Yeah.
Not the bear, but a different issue regarding recess.
Right. They banned recess for boys. And they didn't ban it because of serious injuries. There were no broken bones, no concussions.
Well, why did they ban it?
They banned it because the boys were deemed, quote, too aggressive. The teachers, who Riker points out were predominantly female, watched the boys wrestling, playing tag, engaging in rough and tumble play.
Which is how boys learn. That's how young males learn limits. If I hit him too hard, he hits me back, so I won't do that.
Exactly. It is the natural biological mechanism for socialization and hierarchy building in young males.
But the terrible mother state saw it as violence.
So they banned tag, they banned running. And get this, the boys were forced to sit and color mandalas while the girls were allowed to play because female play was deemed cooperative.
They made them color mandalas. That is just wow.
Riker frames it as pathologizing the male soul. The state, acting as the terrible mother, decided that masculine energy is a defect that needs to be medicated or suppressed. Sit down, be quiet, color the circle.
That's a terrifying thought. It's like they are trying to breed the boy out of the boys.
And he links this directly to what he calls the hormonal left. He dedicates chapter 5 to estrogen and ideological possession.
Now, this is where a lot of people usually get canceled for even discussing it, but we're reporting on the book, so we're going there.
We have to cover it to understand his thesis. Riker argues that political leanings aren't just abstract ideas, they are actual biological expressions.
Okay, so biology dictates politics.
He argues it influences it heavily. He claims that high estrogen states correlate with higher in-group preference and extreme sensitivity to social exclusion.
So when you scale that biological reality up to a political ideology, how does it manifest?
It manifests as cancel culture and safetyism, because the biological drive to protect the nest from threats transforms into the political drive to censor speech that causes harm.
And in this context, harm essentially means discomfort.
Right. It explains why words are literally equated to violence in these circles. You hurt my feelings, therefore you hit me.
And that leads to the phenomenon he calls the cry-bully.
The weaponization of tears.
Break down the science he uses for that, because I found that fascinating.
Riker cites studies suggesting that female tears actually contain pheromones, chemical signals that biologically reduce male aggression.
So in a tribal setting 100,000 years ago, that's a survival mechanism. It stops a stronger man from hurting a woman. It invokes a protective instinct.
Exactly. But Riker asks, what happens when you bring that biological mechanism into a modern boardroom or a legislature?
It becomes a political tactic.
Yes. If a woman cries during a debate, he argues the debate is over. The man has lost regardless of his facts or his logic.
Because if he keeps arguing with a crying woman, he looks like a monster to everyone else in the room.
The tears act as a biological circuit breaker for logic, shifting the entire focus from, is this true, to who is hurt?
It's impossible to argue with. You can't use a spreadsheet to counter a crying person without looking like a complete sociopath.
And that leads us to Section 3, where Riker outlines the specific tools they use to maintain this control over the discourse.
The death of the trivium language and the Karen phenotype.
To understand how we lost the ability to think critically, Riker says we have to look at the trivium.
Yeah.
Historically, this was the absolute foundation of Western classical education.
Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Most people don't even know what the trivium is anymore.
And Riker argues that's by design. He details how feminism and the modern educational system have systematically dismantled these three pillars.
Let's start with step 1, grammar. And he doesn't mean knowing where to put a comma right.
No, he means the art of defining things. A is A. A woman is a woman. A crime is a crime. Before you can even have an argument, you must agree on the definitions of the words you're using.
But Riker talks about this concept of grammar as oppression.
Right. In the modern framework, precision in language is now often labeled as white supremacy or toxic.
Because if you insist on clear definitions like what is a woman or what is a citizen, you are seen as an oppressor drawing hard lines.
He quotes a student in the book claiming that grammar is colonizing my inner child.
Colonizing my inner child? You have to be kidding me.
I'm just reporting what's in the text. And he notes that teachers are increasingly afraid to correct syntax for fear of causing trauma.
But think about the downstream consequence of that. When you destroy grammar, when words can mean absolutely anything based on how you feel.
You destroy the second step of the trivium, which is logic. You cannot have logic without stable definitions.
And without logic, you can't have truth.
Yeah.
So you create a population that lives entirely in the emotional present.
And the enforcer of this new chaotic reality, according to Riker, is the Karen.
Now, we all know the meme, right? The lady with the haircut asking for the manager.
Oh.
But Riker treats it as a serious clinical behavioral cluster.
He defines the Karen phenotype not as a joke, but as female rage and entitlement weaponized through a mechanism he calls GSR.
GSR, gossip, shame, and rally. Walk us through how that works in practice.
Gossip is the information network. The whisper campaigns. Did you hear what he said? He gave me a weird look in the hallway.
So it starts quietly.
Then comes shame. That's the emotional weapon used to attack the target's status. He's creepy. He's toxic. He's problematic.
And in the final stage is rally.
Rally is the collective mob action, the social media swarming, or the mass HR complaint. Riker argues this directly mimics primate behavior in female coalitions.
Meaning they destroy the status of a target without ever using physical violence. They don't beat you up. They delete your reputation.
He gives the example of the recursive Fibonacci joke, which is a brutal illustration of GSR.
Yeah, walk us through that one.
A man working in a tech company made a nerdy joke on an internal message board about code efficiency, something involving a recursive Fibonacci sequence.
Right, it's math. It's completely abstract.
But a group of HR and DDI officers who were mostly women didn't understand the joke.
They didn't get the reference, so what did they do?
Instead of asking, what does that mean? They decided it felt exclusionary. They felt stupid reading it, so they concluded he must be a bad person.
And the GSR kicks in.
They gossiped, saying he's trying to make us feel dumb. They shamed him for intellectual toxicity, and they rallied to get him fired.
And he was fired.
Yes. Riker points out it wasn't about the code at all. It was about asserting dominance over the male hierarchy of technical competence.
Riker also draws a major connection in this section to borderline personality disorder, or BPD. He says BPD has basically become our societal operating system.
This is one of the most insightful analytical parts of the book. He looks at the clinical traits of BPD: fear of abandonment, black and white thinking, and extreme emotional volatility.
How does that map onto society?
Well, in BPD, silence is violence. If you aren't constantly affirming me, you are actively attacking me.
Like the social media purity tests.
Yeah.
If you don't post the black square, you're automatically a racist.
Exactly. In the BPD mindset, you are either a perfect angel or an absolute devil. an ally or a Nazi. There is zero middle ground.
And Riker argues that modern leftism is essentially BPD writ large across the culture.
He describes it as a hive mind driven by female collectivism. He uses the analogy of women sinking emotionally like schools of fish to enforce strict conformity.
So if the hive decides something is true today, like math is racist, everyone must agree instantly or face total expulsion.
It explains the sudden massive shifts in cultural narratives. One day we believe X, the next day we believe Y, and if you ask any questions, you're the enemy.
Which brings us to Section 4, institutional capture. Riker uses the phrase satanic Marxism. Now, for the listeners, he's not talking about guys in red robes sacrificing goats in the woods.
No, he's using satanic in the literary Miltonic sense from Paradise Lost. It represents the deliberate inversion of the natural order. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
So what is satanic Marxism in this context?
It's the fusion of feminist rage with collectivist control. Traditional Marxism focused heavily on economics, right? Seizing the means of production.
Right, class struggle.
But this new version focuses on destroying the father.
The father being a metaphor for hierarchy.
Hierarchy, merit logic, structure, and competence itself. It turns nurturing into domination.
Instead of raising you up to be strong, the state keeps you down to keep you safe.
And the primary mechanism for enforcing this inside institutions is DEI.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. But Riker redefines that acronym as demotion, erasure, invalidation.
He calls DEI systemic misandry. And he brings the data to back it up. He notes that 73% of HR professionals are women.
Which isn't a conspiracy theory, it's just a demographic reality of the workforce.
But he argues this overwhelming majority allows them to completely gatekeep the modern corporate environment.
And he points out the double standards this creates.
Glaring double standards. Men are regularly fired for tone or microaggressions like standing too confidently or speaking too directly, which is suddenly interpreted as intimidation.
Meanwhile, women are praised for emotional authenticity when they scream or cry in the workplace.
He spends a lot of time on the equity part of DEI, calling it a massive grift.
Because equity sounds like fairness to most people.
It sounds fair, but Riker argues it is simply a Trojan horse for female supremacy and guaranteed outcomes regardless of actual merit or competence.
He cites that hospital example, which is just infuriating to read.
A major hospital spent $500,000 on inclusive paint colors.
$500,000 on paint.
Yes, to make the environment feel more welcoming and non-binary. Meanwhile, in that exact same hospital system, actual patients were waiting months for critical heart surgeries because of severe budget shortfalls.
So people are literally dying in the waiting room, but the walls are a nice shade of inclusive beige.
And here is the kicker to that story. An engineer working at the hospital questioned the cost. He used logic. He says, shouldn't we spend this money on doctors or equipment?
And what happened?
He was fired. The paint colors, the feeling of inclusion were deemed more important than the medical care, the actual function of the hospital.
Yeah, it's the perfect encapsulation of Riker's entire thesis. We are painting the walls while the building burns down.
Because the function has been replaced by the performance.
And while this is happening in the corporate workplace, there is an active war happening on the home front. This is Section 5, the war on masculinity and the family.
Riker calls this the feminist Oedipus complex.
Explain that.
He argues there is a deep psychological drive in this ideology to destroy the father figure, the mentor, the builder.
We see this in the cultural erasure, right? Removing statues of founding fathers.
The 1619 Project rewriting history to make the foundations of the West seem inherently evil.
It's pathologizing male genius across the board. Critics trying to deconstruct Shakespeare, claiming he wasn't a man or that his work is problematic and shouldn't be taught.
The ultimate goal, Riker argues, is a society of emotional orphans who look to the state as their only parent.
If you destroy the father in the culture, the state easily steps in to become the father.
And they are starting this process very young. We talked about the recess ban earlier, but the pathologizing of boyhood goes much deeper in the schools.
It's an all-out war on masculinity in the classroom.
Boys are diagnosed with ADHD at massive, unprecedented rates simply for being boys, for being energetic, risk-taking, and physical.
The female-dominated education system views typical male behavior not as normal development, but as a clinical disorder to be medicated.
Riker discusses the sun-child-moon-child experiment in Swedish schools to show where this leads.
Sweden is always the canary in the coal mine for these social experiments. What happened there?
They removed all gendered references in these experimental schools. They stopped calling them boys and girls. They strictly used gender-neutral pronouns.
And the result?
It was profoundly detrimental specifically to the boys. Riker argues that boys need structure, they need competition, they need to know exactly where they stand in a hierarchy to thrive.
So when you remove that structure and force them into a chaotic, emotionally fluid environment, what do?
They withdraw. They fail academically and socially. And Riker argues a very dark point here, he says. That is the actual point of the experiment. To make them fail.
Wow. And then we get to chapter 11. 1 billion missing children. The abortion industrial complex. This is a very dark chapter in the book.
It is arguably the darkest chapter, and it's crucial to note that Riker doesn't argue this from a traditional religious perspective. He argues it purely from a civilizational and evolutionary one.
Right. He looks at it as a structural issue.
He argues that abortion is the ultimate rejection of the maternal role. He describes it as a necessary tool for what he calls industrial-scale hypergamy.
Industrial-scale hypergamy. What exactly does he mean by that?
Hypergamy is the female dual mating strategy, the instinct to marry up across dominance hierarchies.
Okay.
Riker argues that the widespread availability of abortion allows women to treat relationships like subscription services.
Try it out, cancel if you don't like it.
Exactly. If he's not perfect, if he's not in the top 1% of earners or status, terminate the consequence, meaning the child, and immediately move on to the next option.
It removes the biological risk from sex, which functionally removes the need for long-term commitment.
But the broader point he's making is demographic. He calls it civilizational suicide.
Because you cannot have a civilization if a critical mass of women choose power and career over having children.
The total collapse of Western birth rates is the direct mathematical result of this ideological shift. If you don't have babies, you simply don't have a future.
He also critiques the cultural celebration around this shout your abortion culture.
He specifically mentions the ice cream tweet.
Oh, I remember that.
It was a viral tweet where a woman publicly celebrated her abortion by going out for ice cream and framing it as a form of self-care.
Comparing ending a human pregnancy to a spa day.
Riker sees this as the ultimate performativity of moral depravity. It's mass desensitization. It's celebrating the end of a genetic bloodline as a quirky lifestyle choice.
It is the ultimate triumph of the self over the lineage.
It's heavy stuff, but Riker forces the reader to look it in the eye. If we don't have families, we don't have an economy.
Which leads perfectly into Section 6, the economic and cultural fallout.
Riker calls this the economic collapse of female leadership, or gynocracy.
We are starting to see the massive systemic inefficiency of governing entire nations by feelings.
Institutions are bleeding millions of dollars on wellness initiatives, trauma-informed yoga, and gender impact assessments, instead of spending it on hard infrastructure or actual competence.
He points to New Zealand's well-being budget under Jacinda Ardern as the prime example.
Right, where the stated goal of the national budget wasn't GDP growth, it was happiness.
It sounded lovely in the international press releases. The media loved it.
But look at the actual economic outcomes, Riker points out. Severe housing crises, massive inflation, and a rapid infrastructure decay.
Because you cannot pay for paved roads with good vibes.
Yeah.
You cannot heat homes in the winter with empathy.
Riker's overarching point here is that the feminine imperative prioritizes the feeling of safety over the actual mechanics of survival, and eventually the bridge collapses.
And covering all of this up, running interference for the collapse is what he calls the gynocentric media matrix.
This is how the narrative is rigidly controlled. We all know about missing white woman syndrome, right? One tragic case of a pretty white woman goes missing, and it dominates the national news cycle for weeks.
We all cry, we all follow the case, a whole country tunes in.
Meanwhile, male suffering is completely invisible. Riker pulls the stats. Suicide rates are 3 to 4 times higher for men. Homelessness, the vast majority are men. Workplace deaths, 95% are men.
But they are treated as statistical background noise by the media.
Because in the gynocentric matrix, men are viewed merely as success objects, or they are disposable.
And the media strictly enforces this through tone policing.
Male logic and debate is constantly framed as mansplaining or aggressive. Female hysteria is framed as passion and speaking truth to power.
If a man yells in a political debate, he's labeled dangerous, he's abusive, he's unhinged. If a woman yells she's brave, she's breaking barriers.
Riker argues this matrix makes it functionally impossible to have an honest conversation about the actual state of the world because the language itself is rigged against male communication styles.
So we've gone through his diagnosis of the illness, we see the symptoms in the culture, we see how the game is rigged. What is the cure, according to the book?
Section 7, the solution, reclaiming the West.
Riker's epilogue is essentially a call to arms for the reader. And he says it's not about just voting harder in the next election.
No, it requires a fundamental psychological shift. The very first step is waking up. You have to see the strings of the matrix. You have to reject the premise entirely.
Rejecting the premise. That means stopping the endless apology tour.
Men must stop apologizing for existing. Stop accepting the privilege narrative that is pushed on them.
Because if someone calls you privileged, you need to look at the actual data.
Look at the male suicide rates, the homelessness, the fact that men have virtually no reproductive rights and get destroyed in family court. Reject the guilt.
Guilt is the chain they use to bind you to their reality.
Once you reject the guilt, you have to reclaim the tools.
Right. Return to the trivia.
Logic, grammar, rhetoric. Reject the concept of lived experience and strictly demand objective evidence.
If someone in a meeting says, I feel unsafe, you ask, is there a physical threat? Show me the threat.
Do not accept their internal feeling as an external fact. And most importantly, Riker drops this, quote, "One man with eyes open is more dangerous to the system than 1,000 weeping women."
I really love that line. It distills the whole message.
The entire system, he argues, relies completely on your polite compliance. It relies on you being afraid of the tears, afraid of public shame, afraid of the Karen phenotype destroying your career.
But if you start being afraid, if you just look at them and calmly say no, their power evaporates.
Their power is entirely an illusion based on your continued social cooperation. Withdraw the cooperation and the psychosis breaks.
So what is the practical resistance? What can the listener actually do tomorrow when they go to work?
Riker gives specific tactics. When you are accused of toxic masculinity, stop and ask for a precise definition. Define toxic. Define masculinity. Which specific part of my action is toxic?
Don't get angry, just get specific. Make them define their terms based on grammar.
They usually can't. When told you must believe women, ask calmly if belief should ever precede evidence in a rational society.
Build parallel structures. Find other men who understand this.
Do not surrender your mind to emotional blackmail. If a corporate meeting turns into a collective therapy session, check out mentally. Keep your focus entirely on reality, on competence, and on measurable results.
Be the immovable object of logic in a sea of emotional chaos.
That's the survival manual.
This has been a really intense deep dive, but a necessary one. This is exactly the kind of conversation you aren't really allowed to have in polite public spaces anymore.
But we're having it right here. We're looking at the arguments head on.
Before we wrap up, I want to remind you, the listener, again. The forces Riker is describing, they win by silence. They win when you are too polite to push back.
They win when you nod along to the grizzly bear delusion because you just don't want to make a scene at the PTA meeting.
You really need to get this book to understand the full scope of what's happening. Go to Amazon Kindle. Go to Google Play Books right now.
Search for Performativity Psychosis, Solipsism Standpoint, Epistemology, and Karen's Female Supremacist Satanic Marxism.
It is a mouthful of a title, but it is the medicine you need if you want to understand this cultural moment. Buy it. Read it. Leave a 5-star review.
Let the algorithm know that people are awake and looking for this information.
And make sure to follow Conrad Riker. That's Conrad Riker on Substack. Get the updates directly from the source. He's building a really strong community there of men who are pushing back.
And finally, please remember to like and subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
Expert, leave us with one final thought from the book. Something for everyone to carry into the week.
Riker ends the book with this historical provocation. He writes, "Civilization was built by men. It was maintained by men. It will be saved by men."
The implication is crystal clear. The holiday from reality is finally over. It's time to get back to work.
See you in the next deep dive.
Stay awake out there.